The tea kettle had begun to hiss, but Margaret didn't move. She sat at the breakfast table, wrapped in the soft stillness of early spring. Outside the window, the cherry tree in her front yard had started to bloom, scattering pale pink petals across the lawn like forgotten confetti. A soft breeze nudged the lace curtain beside her, casting a dappled pattern of light on the floorboards. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet tucked behind the sugar jar. Margaret Dawson, 72, lifted her teacup with both hands. The floral porcelain warmed her fingers. Though the heat didn't quite reach her chest, she stared across the room at the standing mirror near the hallway, a relic from her wedding day. Oak-framed and elegant, with tiny chips in the wood that told its own history. What she saw in the mirror was familiar and unfamiliar. Her silver hair, neatly brushed and pinned back in a low twist, shimmered in the golden morning light. Her pale blue robe, trimmed in lace, looked freshly pressed, but it wasn't the clothes or the hair that drew her focus. It was her face. The lines around her mouth had deepened just a little more than last month. Or maybe she was finally noticing. The skin beneath her chin had softened. Her eyes, once sharp and piercing even in the darkest of moods, now looked dulled somehow, dimmed, like the flame was still there. But the glass of the lantern had grown cloudy. She leaned forward, narrowing her eyes slightly. Each wrinkle told a story. The crow's feet from squinting into the sun at soccer games, the fine lines above her lip from smiling too much, and from years of sipping strong tea. A tiny scar beneath her left cheek where her wedding ring had scraped her during a kitchen accident in 1981. They were her stories. They were her. So why did they feel like strangers? She wasn't vain. She never had been. She'd never chased fads or face creams with French names. But lately, something had changed, not just in the mirror, but in her bones. Her movements were slower, her days more predictable. Somewhere between retirement and widowhood, she'd become quiet. Not peaceful, not content, just muted. There was no real sorrow, no big grief pressing down, just a soft, persistent dullness, like the radio of her spirit had been turned down too low to hear clearly. She rose, slowly, with a small grunt, and padded toward the kitchen. The kettle was whistling now sharp, insistent. She lifted it from the stove and poured the hot water into her cup, watching the steam curl upward like a ghost. Back at the table, she stirred in a spoonful of honey. It dissolved immediately like so many things lately. She glanced again at the mirror, caught her own gaze. "Who are you these days?" she whispered. The mirror didn't answer. It never did, but it didn't lie either. Margaret sipped her tea and stared out the window at the cherry blossoms. A petal landed on the windowsill and trembled there, as if unsure whether to stay or be carried off by the wind. Much like Margaret herself. The spark in Emily's eyes. The doorbell rang just as Margaret was rinsing her teacup. It chimed through the house like a song she hadn't heard in a while, one that stirred something warm but unexpected. She glanced at the clock above the sink. 12:03 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, her body stiffened with the usual hesitation. Do I answer? Is it a solicitor? Another volunteer drive? But then came the knock, quick, bright, familiar. She smiled. Margaret dried her hands on the dish towel, smoothed her robe, and opened the door. And there stood Emily, 22, full of motion even when she stood still. Her auburn curls framed her freckled face like wildfire in spring, and her oversized sweater hung off one shoulder in a way that would have driven Margaret's mother mad. Emily's canvas tote bag bounced against her hip as she leaned in for a hug. "Grandma," she said, breathless and beaming, "I was driving back from campus and thought, what the heck? I need tea and I need you." Margaret chuckled, her arms instinctively wrapping around the girl. "You always did have good instincts." Emily stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the way only grandchildren can. She dropped her bag by the couch, kicked off her sneakers, and sniffed the air. Lavender and honey. "You haven't changed a bit." Margaret smiled faintly. "That's both comforting and mildly depressing." Emily plopped onto the armchair across from Margaret's. "No, it's nostalgic. You're my safe place, and I brought something fun." Margaret raised an eyebrow as she filled the kettle again. "Last time you said that, we ended up with blue muffins." Emily laughed. "Okay, fair. But this time, I promise no food dye, just science." She fished her phone from her pocket and waved it like a wand. "Have you ever heard of face tapping?" Margaret blinked. "Face what?" "It's this 2-minute technique where you lightly tap different parts of your face to stimulate blood flow and boost collagen. I saw this doctor on TikTok, Dr. Alan Mandel. Super chill guy. He says it helps skin glow, reduces tension, even helps with sleep." Margaret turned back from the counter, one hand on her hip. "You want me to slap myself silly in the name of beauty?" Emily grinned. "No slapping, tapping, light, rhythmic, and kind of fun. Come on, Grandma, let's do it together." Margaret poured hot water into 2 cups, letting the honey melt again like morning snow. She handed one to Emily and sat down across from her. "You think I need collagen?" Emily shrugged. "I think we all need a little wake-up call, inside and out." There was a pause between them, one of those silences that wasn't awkward, just honest. Margaret studied her granddaughter's face. She was glowing, not just with youth, but with something else, something unjaded, unafraid. Margaret smiled softly. "I used to wake up glowing just from laughter, or dancing, or kissing your grandfather in the kitchen." Emily set her tea down. "Then maybe this is about more than just skin. Maybe it's about bringing that girl back, even for a few minutes." Margaret hesitated, then sighed. "Well," she said, smoothing her robe like she was about to walk onto a stage, "show me the video. Dr. TikTok." Emily's grin widened. "Yes, you're going to love this." She set the phone on the windowsill where they could both see. A calm male voice filled the room. "Let's bring some life back to your skin and energy into your day." Margaret rolled her eyes, half mocking, half intrigued. As the video began, and the gentle tapping sounds filled the space, Margaret leaned forward, tapping cautiously at her forehead. Emily mirrored her, bright-eyed and giggling. They looked at each other in the mirror, side by side, and for the first time in a long time, Margaret didn't feel like her reflection was something she had to fix. She felt curious. Tap, laugh, glow. The video began with soft background music, light piano notes that sounded like spring rain on a rooftop. Dr. Alan Mandel appeared on the screen, calm and confident in a plain blue shirt, speaking in a warm, measured tone. "Take a deep breath," he said. "We're going to wake up the skin, the muscles, and the mind. Just 2 minutes. That's all it takes." Margaret leaned forward, skeptical but polite. "He looks like a man who drinks green juice and doesn't own a microwave," she muttered. Emily giggled. "He's harmless. Just follow along." Margaret shifted in her seat, adjusting her robe-like armor. Emily was already tapping her fingertips gently on her forehead in small rhythmic motions. She looked like a curious bird pecking at invisible seeds. Margaret hesitated. Then tentatively she joined in. Her fingers felt cool at first against her skin. Unsure of their purpose, she tapped her forehead, as instructed, then moved to her temples. The skin there was thinner than she remembered. It gave slightly under her touch, like soft leather. Light pressure, Dr. Mandel reminded. This isn't punishment. This is presence. Margaret snorted. He's not wrong. They moved down to the cheeks' gentle drum beats on skin that had weathered 72 winters and an uncountable number of tears, kisses, and midday naps. Tap, tap, tap! Under their eyes now, using the pads of the ring fingers, Emily's reflection smiled beside hers, bright and playful. She tapped with joy, like a child in a game. Margaret mirrored her. Tap, tap, tap! Down to the jawline, then under the chin. Margaret could feel something stirring, not just blood flow, but memory, touch. She couldn't remember the last time she'd held her own face with such kindness. Not scrubbed, not covered, just touched. I used to massage my face with cold cream when I was your age, she said suddenly. Noxzema, the smell of eucalyptus and youth. Emily looked over, still tapping. Did it work? Margaret smiled faintly. I don't remember, but I liked how it made me feel. Her hands moved more freely now, following the motions without hesitation. There was no magic wand, no miracle transformation, but there was something warm rising under her skin, something light pressing against the years that had grown too heavy. And then without warning, she laughed. It bubbled up from her chest, surprised her. A real, full laugh that made her shoulders shake and her tapping turn clumsy. Emily looked up, startled, then laughed too. Grandma, what's so funny? Margaret laughed harder. I don't know, I just... Look at us two fools tapping our faces like bongo drums. Emily grinned. The Bongo Sisters. They kept tapping, laughing, and laughing some more until they both had tears in their eyes and couldn't remember the last time they laughed that long without someone dying or falling or embarrassing themselves at Thanksgiving. When the video ended, the room was filled with something rare and precious. Not silence. Stillness. The kind that only follows genuine joy. Margaret looked into the mirror again. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes brighter. The lines around her mouth were still there, but now they looked like the remnants of a smile that had never quite faded. She turned to Emily and reached out, brushing a curl from her granddaughter's cheek. I don't know what just happened, she whispered, but I think something good woke up. Emily nodded, her voice soft. You're glowing. Margaret glanced back at the mirror. No magic, no miracle. Just a moment. And for the first time in years, that was more than enough. A different reflection. The soft buzz of the phone ceased, and the room fell into a kind of holy stillness, the kind that followed belly laughter and the unexpected arrival of joy. Margaret remained seated, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The warmth from the tapping still lingered on her cheeks, like sunlight after a cloud had passed. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't want to. It was the kind of stillness one didn't dare interrupt for fear of waking from a dream. She turned her head slowly and looked once more into the mirror. The same woman stared back. The same lines traced the corners of her eyes. The same soft fold beneath her chin. The same aging skin she'd learned to see as a decline. But something was different. Not erased. Not altered. Just softened. She leaned in slightly, squinting at her reflection. The laugh lines around her mouth weren't harsh anymore. They looked like the smile was still there, even though her lips had long since settled. The furrow between her brows, the one that had arrived in her 40s and taken up permanent residence, seemed less like a crease of worry and more like the evidence of a life deeply thought through. She reached up and touched her cheek with the back of her fingers. Warm, supple, alive. Not perfect, not polished, but awake. Behind her, Emily had curled into the armchair, scrolling through her phone with the distracted grace of the young. The afternoon light cast a golden crown over her curls, and Margaret watched her with quiet affection. "Emily," she said, her voice low and a little rough with emotion. Her granddaughter looked up immediately. "Yeah!" Margaret smiled, eyes misted. "Thank you. For today. For this." Emily tilted her head. "For tapping your face." "No," Margaret said gently. "For helping me remember I still have one worth showing." Emily blinked, surprised by the weight of the words. Then she set her phone down and got up, walking over to kneel beside her grandmother's chair. "You've always had it, Grandma. You just forgot how bright it was." They sat there, hands folded together on Margaret's lap. The silence was no longer heavy, no longer filled with distance or routine. It felt complete, shared. "I used to feel like I was fading," Margaret admitted, staring out the window where a soft breeze stirred the petals on the cherry tree, like each day was a quieter version of the last. Emily squeezed her hand. "You're not fading. You're shifting, like a sunrise, not gone, just changing colors." Margaret let the words settle into her like tea soaking into dry leaves. She rose slowly, walked over to the mirror once more, and stood before it. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, looked herself full in the face. "I don't need to look 10 years younger," she said aloud. To herself, "I need to feel one day more alive." Behind her, Emily smiled. "You tapped into something, huh?" Margaret chuckled. "Apparently I did." She reached for a hairbrush and pulled it slowly through her silver waves. The simple act felt ceremonial, restorative, like she wasn't grooming herself for the world, but for her own reintroduction. Margaret Dawson, 72, reader, grandmother, tea drinker, and now, face tapper. Her reflection gazed back with calm, mischievous warmth. "I like her," she whispered. "I think I've missed her." And this time, the mirror didn't just reflect, it agreed. Passing it on. The next Thursday, the women of the Maplewood Book Club gathered in Margaret's sunroom, 6 armchairs in a loose circle, half-empty mugs of chamomile tea steaming gently beside well-worn novels. It was the kind of afternoon that smelled like lemon cookies and carried the hush of old friendship. Marjorie, tall and sharp-tongued, the club's unofficial timekeeper, adjusted her reading glasses and gave the group a pointed look. "So, are we going to discuss the book? Or are we all pretending little fires everywhere didn't set any fires in us at all?" Diane smirked behind her teacup. "I read half, then I got distracted by a YouTube tutorial on pie crust braiding." Margaret smiled quietly but didn't speak, not yet. There was something resting just beneath her collarbone. Today an impulse, like a small bird stirring. She felt nervous. Oddly enough, silly, even, but it wouldn't let her go. Her fingers grazed the ceramic rim of her teacup, tracing it in slow circles. "Before we get to the book," she began, clearing her throat, "I'd like to share something else, something small." All eyes turned to her. Marjorie arched an eyebrow. "Does it involve wine or men under 60? Because if not, I may need convincing." A few light laughs floated through the room. Margaret chuckled. "No, nothing scandalous. Just something I've been doing." She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. On it, scribbled in her tidy cursive, was a note she'd taken from Dr. Mandel's video, each tapping point, each breathing instruction. It looked almost like choreography, a dance for the face. "I've started this thing called face tapping," she said. "My granddaughter showed it to me. You lightly tap pressure points on your face for a few minutes a day. It's supposed to increase blood flow, support collagen, help relax the muscles. But," she paused, searching their eyes, "it did something else for me." Diane leaned in. "Like what?" "It woke me up," Margaret said. "Not just my skin, my self. I didn't even know I'd gone numb. But I had, somewhere along the years between funerals, joint pain, and being called dear at the grocery store, I'd stopped touching my own face like it mattered. Like I mattered." The room was quiet now, not skeptical, listening. "I laughed while I did it," she added, eyes shining. "Not because it worked miracles, but because it reminded me how long it had been since I did something silly and gentle and completely for me." Silence. Then Joyce, the soft-spoken widow who rarely shared more than a few words each week, whispered, "I haven't laughed in months. Not really." Margaret turned to her gently. "Would you try it with me?" Joyce blinked. "Here." "Yes," Margaret said. "Now. We've spent years talking about fiction. Maybe we try something real for a change." A quiet murmur passed around the circle, part curiosity, part amusement. "Well," Marjorie said, sitting up straighter, "if we're going to look ridiculous, we may as well do it together." The women laughed, setting down their tea and pulling chairs a little closer. Margaret stood, a soft authority in her voice now. "Start with your forehead, just your fingertips, like you're knocking politely on the door of your own soul." 6 pairs of aging hands lifted in near unison. Hesitant at first, tap, tap, tap. Foreheads, temples, cheeks. Diane giggled. "We look like we're rehearsing a mime act." Joyce smiled. "Maybe we're miming who we used to be." Marjorie rolled her eyes, but even she cracked a grin. "If this gives me even 5 minutes of fewer hot flashes, I'll put it in my will." Laughter, real and deep, rippled through the group. The tapping slowed. Their hands dropped gently to their laps. And something shifted. The room didn't just feel full, it felt alive, like something had been passed hand to hand, woman to woman. Not a beauty tip, a blessing. Margaret looked around the circle of glowing, slightly flushed faces. They weren't younger, but they weren't smaller anymore either. "Next week," she said softly, "bring your own mirror. We'll tap, then talk." Marjorie nodded, "And maybe wine after that." Everyone agreed. The book club resumed, but the story that lingered wasn't from a paperback. It was written across their skin, in touch, in laughter, in the courage it took to believe, if only for a few minutes, that you still deserve to feel beautiful. The Glow Circle. It started with 6 women. A Thursday morning, a mirror balanced on a side table, and the simple act of tapping. Now, 3 weeks later, Margaret's living room was gently humming with something that couldn't quite be explained. The chairs had multiplied, borrowed from the dining room, pulled in from the porch. The teacups clinked softly as friends settled in, some with scarves wrapped neatly around their shoulders, others in yoga pants or Sunday cardigans. The room smelled of citrus oil and warm cinnamon. Margaret had started diffusing them for atmosphere, though truthfully, it was to help her nerves settle. The sun streamed through the windows, casting lace-shaped shadows across the hardwood floor. Outside, the cherry blossoms had given way to young green leaves. Spring had taken hold. Margaret stood near the mirror at the front of the room, holding a small index card with handwritten steps, though by now. She didn't need it. She had the routine memorized. What she didn't yet fully comprehend was how this tiny ritual had spread like fire across dry grass. They called themselves the Glow Circle. It began as a joke, something Marjorie coined during the second week. If we're going to look flushed and foolish, we might as well brand it. Everyone laughed, but the name stuck because somewhere between self-deprecating humor and real relief. They began to believe in the glow they were creating. "All right," Margaret said, clapping gently for attention. "You know the drill." She looked around, 10 women, all over 60, some widowed, some divorced, one still married, though she never spoke of him, all of them here for something unspoken, a lifeline, a laugh, a mirror that didn't lie, but didn't criticize either. Margaret began, "Forehead, lightly, breathe in as you tap." They followed, some with practiced grace, others still a little unsure, but they did it together. Tap, tap, tap. Foreheads, temples, under eyes, cheeks, chin. The motion was no longer awkward. It was intimate, not sexual, not clinical, just human. A return to touch, a reclaiming of faces long ignored, or only examined with critical eyes. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic tapping, the occasional giggle, the slow, deep breaths. It wasn't just collagen they were stirring. It was courage. After 2 minutes, Margaret lowered her hands. So did the others. Then came the moment they never rushed. Looking, each woman turned to her own small mirror, propped on tables, perched on windowsills, held gently in hand. No one tried to hide. No one apologized for what they saw. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. "You know," Diane finally said, breaking the stillness, "I used to avoid mirrors unless I had lipstick on. Now I'm starting to like the way I look even when I don't." There were murmurs of agreement. "I've been holding my face like it was someone else's," Joyce added softly. "Now it feels like mine again." Margaret nodded. Her heart swelled, a soft ache at the edges of her ribs. She spoke gently, but with conviction. "This isn't about pretending we're 25 again. It's about remembering we're still here, still vibrant, still worth the time it takes to look at ourselves and say, 'You matter.'" The words lingered, not like a speech, but like truth. Then came tea and laughter, talk of grandkids, shoulder pain, bad knees, and recipes for carrot cake that swore off sugar but secretly didn't. It was ordinary, and yet it wasn't. The Glow Circle met every Thursday after that. Word spread. A few daughters came. One brave gentleman from the next building asked if he could join for health reasons. Of course, no one turned him away. Margaret had no intention of starting a movement, but one was beginning quiet, grassroots, skin deep and soul wide. It wasn't just a beauty routine. It was a homecoming. And every week, as she looked into her mirror and touched her own face, Margaret said the words that had become her silent prayer. "This is not the end of me. This is the part where I begin again." Margaret's story isn't just about skincare. It's about rediscovering yourself one gentle tap at a time. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear you're still glowing, you're still worth it. Tap the like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell for more real, uplifting stories that celebrate life at every age. And in the comments, tell us when was the last time you looked in the mirror and smiled at who you saw. This isn't the end of you. It's the part where you begin again.